Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 3 trade targets for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be discussing 5 players that I believe you guys should be looking to trade for based upon how they have played thus far in the season and how I feel they are going to be playing much better in the future. But before we get into the deep dive into these players, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I would also like to ask that if you guys have a Twitter and would like to follow me, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. The link to my Twitter is also down below in the description. On Twitter, I talk all about injuries, basically anything that's happening in fantasy football that I believe to be relevant, I tweet about, as well as answering questions on there. I also answer tons of questions in the comment section, so if you guys have any questions related to trades or related to anything fantasy football, please make sure to ask down below in the comment section. So without further ado, let's get into the video. My first trade target of week number 3 is A.J. Brown, wide receiver of the Tennessee Titans. In week number 2, he faced up against the Seattle Seahawks, and in my head, I'm not thinking the Seattle Seahawks defense is going to be an ultra difficult matchup for A.J. Brown. Now, that's not saying that they're a bad defense, but they are a defense I believe that A.J. Brown could conquer. But in week number 2, A.J. Brown doesn't play that well. He has 3 receptions on 9 targets for 43 receiving yards. He did so bad that his family was poking fun at him. As A.J. Brown tweeted, "Someone from my family told me I wouldn't have caught COVID today, even if I tried," implying that this guy couldn't catch anything on Sunday. And it was true. A.J. Brown had a horrific game compared to what most people would project him to do on the week. On the season right now, A.J. Brown is not doing well. Wide receiver 47 in PPR, 45.5 PPR, and he is the wide receiver number 47 in standard. Despite these struggles, though, Brown still leads the Titans with targets, having 17 targets on the season. So a lot of people drafted A.J. Brown as a top 12 wide receiver. Some people drafted him inside the top 10 at the wide receiver position. Some even drafted him as a top 8 wide receiver. So they may start to get antsy. They may start to get a little bit nervous because, oh man, Derrick Henry ran for 200 plus yards last week up against Seattle. Oh man, Julio Jones is in town. Now it's time to run away from A.J. Brown. I'm not worried at all about A.J. Brown. I think he's going to have a perfectly fine season and still has the chance to finish as a top 12 wide receiver. We're just 2 weeks into the season. The season is super long, and A.J. Brown has a very good chance to have a bounce back next couple of weeks, especially with how easy his schedule is. Now, next week, this is definitely not an easy matchup up against the Indianapolis Colts. While the Colts defense hasn't looked as good as I thought they would look this season, they're no easy task. But after that, he gets the New York Football Jets, who are just atrocious, and then he gets the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, so he could easily squash both of those teams in the next couple of weeks. So I believe A.J. Brown is in for a huge bounce back for the rest of the season. This is a team that isn't going to necessarily have Derrick Henry run the ball for 200 plus yards every single Sunday. A.J. Brown is heavily involved on this team, as he does have 17 total targets. He was not playing the best last couple of weeks, but I believe he's going to be perfectly fine for the rest of the season. I am very ambitious to go ahead and get A.J. Brown onto my team right now. Next up, we have a running back in Jonathan Taylor, running back of the Indianapolis Colts. In week number 2 up against the LA Rams, Jonathan Taylor had just 15 rushes for 51 rushing yards with 1 reception on 1 target for 2 receiving yards. Now, Jonathan Taylor's hype train stood at a complete and utter standstill right when Carson Wentz got hurt. Before Carson Wentz got hurt, there were talks about him potentially being a top 5 running back in fantasy football, but then Wentz gets hurt and people start getting nervous. Now, Carson Wentz does end up starting the season for the team, but he did end up getting banged up in last week's game up against the LA Rams. And that is going to make people worry even further for Jonathan Taylor because, hey, Jacob Eason isn't very good, which I agree with, but I think Jacob Eason is fine at handing the ball off to Jonathan Taylor. Sure, the offensive line doesn't look amazing right now, but I also believe the offensive line is going to continue to correct itself as the season goes along and as they form more cohesion as a unit. So I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be perfectly fine on the season. Right now, he's running back 24 in PPR, 27.5 PPR, and running back number 29 in standard. While his draft stock did drop as the offseason went along, he was still being drafted inside of the top 2 rounds in drafts, and in a lot of drafts he was taken at the end of the first round. So people may start to panic. They may start to worry. They might start to think that, hey, Jonathan Taylor, maybe he wasn't that guy that I thought he was going to be. Now in week number 1, Jonathan Taylor saw a bunch of targets, but in week number 2 that ended up going down. Now I don't expect Jonathan Taylor to come out and be Christian McCaffrey the next couple of weeks and get 10, 12, 13 plus targets every single game. That is just not going to fucking happen with how they use Nyheim Hines in this offense. But Jonathan Taylor is still a viable piece on a offense that I believe will continue to get better as the season goes along. I think Jonathan Taylor right now is the lowest price you will ever be able to get him. So go ahead and scoop up Jonathan Taylor right now on the cheap. Next up, we're back onto the wide receiver position with Allen Robinson of the Chi-Town Bears. Now in 2020, Allen Robinson also started the season off a little bit slow. He wasn't having those huge games like he was having later on in the season. Why is that? It might be because he doesn't have that chemistry with the quarterback. Last year, it was Mitch Trubisky, and then it was 9-inch Nicholas Foles, and then it's Mitch Trubisky. It was a fucking carousel at the quarterback position. Guess how it has been this year? It's Dalton, and now it's Justin Fields because of an injury. There's no connection there between the wide receiver and the quarterback. So I expect things to turn around very, very soon for Allen Robinson, and I expect Allen Robinson to look a lot better with Justin Fields under center. Now, Matt Nagy came out today and said that, hey, I like that Justin Fields is the starter. He's the starter for this week. That's great and all. But once Andy Dalton returns, Andy Dalton is going to be the starter. Now, how much can you really put into that sentiment? Because while that may be true right now, they said the same thing about Tyrod Taylor and Justin Herbert the pervert last year. They were talking about how, hey, once Tyrod comes back, Justin Herbert's going to get kicked to the curb, and Tyrod Taylor's going to be inserted back as the starting quarterback. But then we saw Justin Herbert look amazing, and guess what happened? Tyrod Taylor didn't grace the field again. So in this scenario with the Chicago Bears, it could be that Justin Fields just remains the guy for the rest of the season if he is able to play very well for the team. Right now, Allen Robinson, a guy that I was touting to be a top 10 wide receiver, he's wide receiver 56 in PPR, 57.5 PPR, and the wide receiver 61 in standard. And I really do believe that a lot of this struggle is because of the lack of chemistry, and that's going to take a couple of weeks for him to potentially get in rhythm with the quarterback. With that said, Allen Robinson has put up numbers with the likes of Blake Bortles, Nick Foles, as well as Kissin' Titties Mitchell Trubisky. So my guess is that eventually he will figure things out and he will be perfectly fine on the season as a whole. Next up, we are going back into the running back well, but before we do so, I'd like to ask if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure that you guys do hit that subscribe button down below, as well as hitting that like button. I would appreciate it a ton. So back into it, we got a running back, Tyson Williams of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the first 3 players I have talked about in this video, they have struggled. They have struggled immensely this season, but this player, Tyson Williams, he hasn't really struggled at all. In week 2 up against the Kansas City Chiefs, Tyson Williams had 13 rushes for 77 yards and 2 receptions on 2 targets for 16 receiving yards. On the season, right now, Tyson Williams is running back 14 in PPR, tied with Melvin Gordon and David Montgomery. He's running back 13.5 PPR, tied with Melvin Gordon, and he's running back number 12 in standard, tied with, you guessed it, Melvin Gordon. This isn't really a buy low scenario at all, but in my opinion, this isn't a buy high scenario either, because I don't think most people are selling Tyson Williams at the value that he could probably reach at the end of the season as a top 12, potential top 8 running back. This Baltimore Ravens offense loves to run the rock aggressively. Sure, Lamar Jackson's a big part of that. Sure, Lamar Jackson's gonna vulture touchdowns, but Lamar Jackson doesn't just not dump off to the running back. Lamar Jackson doesn't just not hand the ball off. They run the ball a whole ton, and it appears that Tyson Williams right now, he's the clear lead running back. While I thought maybe, hey, Latavius Murray would get more of a chance last week because Tyson Williams kind of struggled at the end of the first game up against the Las Vegas Raiders, and they kind of pulled him out, let Latavius Murray play a little bit. But in week number 2, they went right back to Tyson Williams, and Williams played a majority of the game and looks like the best running back on the team. team. Behind him again is Latavius Murray. So Latavius Murray will have a decent role in this offense, but it's not like Devontae Freeman, Le'Veon Bell, any of these other fucking ancient running backs that they have on the Baltimore Ravens is going to have any impact on Tyson Williams. I am looking to aggressively trade for Tyson Williams right now, as I believe he really could finish inside the top 8 at the running back position on, like I said, such a run-heavy offense in Baltimore. So final player to discuss in today's video is George Kittle me Timbers, tight end of the San Francisco 49ers. In week number 2, up against the Philadelphia Eagles, George Kittle went 4 for 4 like he was at Wendy's for 17 receiving yards and a fumble. On the season, George Kittle is tight end number 12 in PPR, 13.5 PPR, and tight end number 13 in standard. That's not good. You drafted George Kittle to be a top 3 tight end. In every single league, he was either tight end number 2 or 3 off the board, unless, of course, you have some diehard San Francisco 49ers fan in your league, and then maybe he drafted George Kittle in the first round. But in most leagues, he was going in the second or the third round as either tight end number 2 or 3 off the board. Now, I talked about all offseason that I believe that maybe George Kittle was going to struggle once they changed from Jimmy Guap, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jimmy G-Spot, Jimmy Pornstar, going from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance. And I said this because Jimmy Garoppolo's favorite target on the field is typically George Kittle. And then what happens when Lance is there? Are they going to try to run the ball a lot more? I'm not sure what's going to happen when Lance becomes the guy. But based upon how the team's playing right now, I'm not too sure when they're going to insert Trey Lance into this offense. So I think George Kittle is a guy that could still be a top 3 tight end in fantasy football. He is one of the bigger targets on the San Francisco 49ers offense. And I think once they start really gelling, once Ayuk gets out of the doghouse, once he escapes being just an afterthought of the team because Kyle Shanahan just doesn't want him to get the ball. Once he's up there with Debo, with George Kittle, I think things turn around for George Kittle relatively quickly. And if things don't, then next year, you just don't draft George Kittle. But right now, I think things are pretty easily going to turn his way this season. And a lot of the blame for at least this week's down game was because he was playing up against Philly. And it was just a 17-11 game. So I expect Kittle to be in more high-scoring games now. But Nick, in week number 1 against the Lions, George Kittle wasn't amazing either. I understand, but I think he will have a big bounce back coming for the rest of the season. George Kittle is still one of the best tight ends in the NFL as well as in fantasy football. So go ahead and scoop him up on the cheap. So thank you guys all so much for watching this video. If you did end up enjoying, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I'm putting out this content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 Fantasy Football Championship. I would really appreciate it if you followed me on Twitter as well. On YouTube, I have like 17,000 subscribers. On Twitter, I guess I have a micro cock or something because I have 1,500 followers. So please follow me on there just for the ego boost. Because that's all I'm looking for. So thank you guys for watching. I love you guys all. Thank you for all of the support that you guys have shown recently. I love you guys so much. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to leave them in the comments. If I don't get to your question, just ask again like the next day, and I probably will end up answering it. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for all the questions you guys get. Thank you for leaving the likes. Thank you for all of the positive comments you guys leave as well. I appreciate it a ton. Have a great rest of your guys' day. Make sure that you stay safe as always. Goodbye.